basically, we would like to present you with our vision on the economic situation since the 2 months as the war broke out. And then we're going to have a discussion when focusing on the main ideas of how the infrastructure problems are currently holding back the restoration of Ukrainian economy after the first shocks of the war. So right now I would like to pass the floor to Maria Repko. She is the deputy head of the CES. She's going to represent you with our outline for the economical situation throughout April and beginning of May. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Hlib. Thank you very much to all of our audience. Thank you very much for joining our event today. This is the second time we're holding this event. And even though there is the full lack of data of what is going on with the economy and with its components, we are trying to find some certain ways in order to be able to take a look at the situation and to describe the situation thoroughly. I will try to share my screen in a second. And I do hope that you're able to see that. So the presentation that we have prepared. All of us, we do know, and if you might not have known, that maybe there will be something new for you, that the biggest part of the territory that used to be at the temporary occupation by Russia, or that used to be under the military action, it is already freed. So this is how the map looked like at the very same period when we had the first presentation last time. And this is the map of Ukraine right now. That's what we can say, that we can now see Ukrainians coming back. Ukrainians now know that it's safe at home, so the territories where they reside have already been freed, or this immediate danger has decreased. So basically 1/3 of Ukrainians have already assumed that it is safe to be home and they wanted to get back. So some of them, they wanted to get back to their families. Around 20% of Ukrainians saying that they are just temporarily visiting just to take their clothes or just to get closer to the relatives for some time. So basically, we don't have this official statistics. So what we now have, there is around 6 million people who've already left Ukraine, and there is almost 1.7 million people who've gone back home. So 4.4 million people, those are the people who currently left, but that's quite a lot, but the situation is getting better in time. And according to the surveys that we had, 84% who currently reside abroad, they're planning to get back home. What is going on with the companies overall? So we have had a really nice survey from the European Business Association, because unfortunately any other surveys are not available for us yet, so we can only use this questionnaire. So half of the companies are currently paying their salaries were in full scope. Half of the companies are providing support to the army or the humanitarian help, and they have lost around $518 million. Those are the companies that are the members of the European Business Associations. We know that a lot of companies are restoring their work. There's 28% of companies who are working on the full scope. Even months ago, there was just 17% of the companies working like that. In limited capacities, we have around 70% of the companies working, and they understand that working under limitations. We can see that the salaries are decreasing. We see that the companies, they have already provided, they started to provide less additional payments and additional salaries, and they've started to decrease their salaries in time. What was interesting for us is that the self-evaluation of the companies, how long can they last like that? The half a year, that will be for the most of the companies, we can see 16 companies can even last for a year longer with the financial results that they have. 80% can stay longer for a year, and only 36 will stay for half a year. More than 30% of the companies, they already have less reserves than for a couple of months. So we can see that the reserves are becoming extinct even for most of the companies. Still, the second month of war has shown us that Ukraine has a couple of important bottlenecks. The fuel markets, the price has risen up to 8% in March, But due to some regulations and limitations of the retail prices, the price has stopped its increase. But still, at the fueling station all over Ukraine, we can see the deficiency of fuels. Metallurgy, we have lost a lot of assets, the Azovstal and MMKI. So basically, Zaporizhstal can only work for half of its capacities, and the ArcelorMittal still, they're started to restore their operations. And we also understand that there is that decrease of the importing quotas and fees for the Ukrainian producers, which is very important. In the agricultural sector, we have started the main planting stage right now, and 80% of the areas will be covered compared to year 2021. According to the government of Ukraine, the deficiency of fuel, of course, is a problem for the agricultural sector, and there are some of the reserves that are being helping with that. But the most important thing is about the infrastructure and logistics. This is one of the main points of our discussion today. We're not going to be mentioning this issue in this case, even though in our report you may find it. We have Iryna Kosse at our panel, and we're really grateful for her impact on the infrastructural part when we have made this overview. She was our best analyst in this case, and we would really like to learn some of the ideas from her. The banking system has shown its resilience, and Ukrainians can still pay with plastic cards. They have no problems with accessing their money. Why? We have asked those questions at one of the panels that we have organized a couple of weeks ago, and we have posed these questions so that we have analyzed it together with our partners. And we have heard from our partners that the three keys for the resilience of Ukrainian banking systems, first of all, was the reforms of 2015-2020, basically the reform of the corporate governance, the reform of the surveillance that helped us to improve the capitalizations and the portfolios of the banks, which actually increased its resilience. There was the good response time, so basically the limitations for the cash flow and providing the needed liquidity through the financial mechanisms, the timely stop for the sanctions for the banks on the restructurings of the loan portfolios. And the third problem was about the banks itself. The banks were quite resilient, and there has been a lot of heroic actions that the people have taken, especially at the territories where the military actions took place. So, it seems like due to the COVID-19, a lot of banks have become really flexible in their operations and on digitalization notion. So they know how to reorganize their work in a way so that there's big disruption, there's big problems for the operational activities would not be very painful for them. And we also have seen that the money of the natural persons, they're still available in the banking system. They're still using it in the system. And we know that there's sometimes even increase of some deposit accounts that we have seen due to some limitations, of course, and due to the idea that we haven't seen the really big scarcity when the economy of Ukraine, of the fighting country, they didn't turn to cash or into currencies. We didn't see that in Ukraine. The system is left sustainable. But the budget is not that's resilient. If, for example, in February, so we've used some of the resources and incomes of the National Bank was also used for the budget. In March, we have seen a lot of money from the dividends from the state-owned enterprises, more than $1.1 billion. In April, we've had some support from the international partners, almost around $800 million that have been provided as granting. So we can see that the budget deficiency grows. And it is a serious problem for us. We're trying to finance it with the help of loans and borrowings from both external and internal markets, through foreign credits and foreign loans, and through the direct assets and equities from the national banks. What else is important to note down, and what is also mentioned in our report, what also we consider a separate chapter that is dedicated to the liberalization of the labor code. This one of the important measures was about facilitating the life of the enterprises that once again are facing unexpected challenges right now, and they needed now to follow these norms, like, for example, providing the 2 weeks notice, which wasn't really possible under the military conditions and under the war conditions. So that is why. And we have introduced more liberal rules on employment, on the vacations, and on firing, and on regulating some of the other labor conditions. Another procedure and another chapter that we have been doing really with a great interest was the financial support to Ukraine. What we have seen that basically the promises on financial support to Ukraine, they are slightly bigger than basically what we have in the budget in the end. So in real time, we don't see there's a lot of incomes, and the share of the grants is not that high as we would like to see that. But the situation is changing. And we have already seen the approved decisions on the financial support that are going to be granted to Ukraine. And of course, there might be even the covering of Ukrainian deficiency of budget on the in size of the $5 billion a month. There were some plans on the restoration and reconstruction of Ukraine further on. This is why I would like to turn to the main chapter. The final chapter that was about the plan of restoration of Ukraine. So basically, the plan has already been discussed in multiple circles, and we have the independent plans from different colleagues. So there are some plans that have already been introduced by the governments through Julius Sviridenko, the Vice Prime Minister, and there's already a governmental group which is titled the National Council on Restoring Ukraine Out of the Impact of War. And we already have the working group that works in the framework of this National Council that has to outline what might be the economical policy of Ukraine in order to stimulate the restoration and the reconstruction of Ukraine. In our point of view, any kind of restoration should have those three things in mind. Well, basically all of that there is very important, but the first thing that is important that Ukraine has to be a leader in understanding and guiding this restoration, how it should take place. Then Ukrainian government has to be accountable. So all of the expenses on the restorations have to be checked. And the third thing is one of the most important things, even though all of the points are important, but it's just that the third point that I do believe quite an important story of change, that this restoration should be held according to the principles of the European Union already. Ukraine might potentially have the candidacy to the European Union soon, so that's all of the next step and all of the next policies, they have to follow the preparation plan for Ukraine to be joining the European Union. So that is why the restoration of Ukrainian economy have to be based on the green restoration, green innovation, and all of the other principles of the European Union. So that is why my presentation, the very brief presentation focusing on infrastructure, is over. Thank you very much for your attention. And I would like to point it out for those people who might not know yet that the National Bank has a special account. So you can actually transfer your money for the support of Ukrainian army to that account so that Ukraine will be able to win this war faster and to start the restoration of Ukrainian capacities. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Maria. Thank you very much. Once again, wanted to outline that you might see this report on our website, both in Ukrainian and English. So our monthly research is being published there. You might see the previous version at our website, the previous version of our website, the previous report for April, the one that we prepared before. And you might see more on how the war has started and what were the first impact for Ukrainian economy of the war. And you might see that this report is covering the second stage of the war. And our today's event, as Maria has spoken about that as well, speaking about the National Bank, it's now being translated to English, and we have the simultaneous interpretation as well today. So our participants can hear our today's conversation as well. So, starting from this overall review, we would like to switch to the specialized topic. One of the highlights that we wanted to emphasize today is the topic of the infrastructure. So, why have we believed that this topic is very important for us at this moment? Because as of now, since the three regions of Ukraine that have been freed from the Russian occupation, and since we have had the restoration of economical activities already, and if we already have the coming back of the residents and we're restoring the economical activities of Kiev as the capital of Ukraine, and we're starting to think of broader perspectives for a longer phases of war, and we're starting to think of what is going to be going on with Ukrainian economy slightly later and what is going to be happening with the new phase of this phase of the war. And it has been obvious from the very beginning of the war, but at this stage, we understand that the issue of transport and infrastructure is very important now, and we can outline that due to the negotiations of Ukrainian government with international partner. And this question is not even about the internal logistics question, as it used to be in the first months of war, but this is the issue of infrastructure so that the Ukrainian product would have the opportunity to be exported to the international market and for us to support the imports as well. So we have the three participants of our today's discussion. As Maria has already mentioned, today our colleague from Institute of Economical Research and Political Consultations, Iryna Kosse, the senior researcher. We also have Mustafa Nayyem today, who is the Deputy Minister of Infrastructure of Ukraine. And we also have Valerii Tkachov with us, who is the Deputy Director of the Department for the Commercial Work of Ukrzaliznytsia. And I would like to ask Iryna, first of all, to give us an outline of the situation that we currently have in Ukraine with all of those opportunities on exporting exporting our products. What is actually opportunities for us for broadening this perspectives of supply? And I would like to ask then Mustafa to tell us more about the opportunities for broadening this exporting opportunities for those bottlenecks that we currently have in the infrastructure for us to provide the restoration of Ukrainian economy. And then I will ask Valerii to basically give us the details of what is going on right now with Ukrzaliznytsia so that we could be able to use its capacities fully. Yes, thank you, Hlib. Then I will try to do a very general outline of the infrastructure at this moment. And I would like to start with the sectors that we are all interested in. I would like to start with the aviation sector because we know that the air carrying in the airspace of Ukraine, they're being stopped because we've had the attacks for most of Ukrainian airports and airport infrastructure, but Ukrainian airlines that are continuing to work. We've had this message from the Ukrainian international airlines that are going to be providing their flights into leasing with their crew, and their crew are continuing servicing the European routes, and they're still continuing working with the MAL suits and uniforms, and they're continuing showing the visibility of Ukraine at this market. And we also have the SkyUp company that is still continuing the cargo transportation and mostly using the Polish airports for that. The biggest pain for us right now is the sea logistics right now. Out of 13 Ukrainian ports, 4 ports are closed because they either are temporarily occupied. Some of the ports are closed due to the reasons that there is the close access to the Black Sea, and 3 ports on the sea, they continuing their work. All of the ports that are being closed, those are the ports of Mariupol, Berdyansk, Skadovsk, and Kherson. Those are the ones that are in the temporarily occupied territory, and Odessa, Chornomorsk ports, they're working. The Belgorod-Dnestrovsky port is also trying to work, and Reni, Ismail, and Ust-Dunaysk ports in the Danube River, they are continuing working with the cargo and continuing working. But the flow of EU export and import that used to be in Ukraine and out of Ukraine is uncomparable, and cannot be processed through all those three ports that continue to work, because the biggest ports that we've had and that used to process the goods, so what mostly about the grains and the iron ore, there was always around Odessa, and unfortunately we cannot deliver this cargo through the sea, so it's going to be a really big problem to retransfer it through different means and retransfer it through different countries and different borders, through the western border, for example. So basically this luggage is now transported by cars and by the railway, and we can see that this is going to be really problematic issues, because we know that those networks were not dedicated to this scale of the carriages and this kind of products. So we have seen already that there is an increase of the scale, and there's a lot of work that has been done by Ukrzaliznytsia. They have been working together with the partners, and they have been working together with Poland, Slovakia, Romania, Hungary, in order to increase the number of the trains that pass through the border, but still it's not enough for us to cover all of the exporting potential that Ukraine used to have before. So thus, we can currently see that there is a huge queues of the carriages that can be seen from the Ukrainian side of the border. And we understand that this queue did increase by 30% basically, and I do think that Valerii is going to tell us in details about that. And Ukrzaliznytsia is right now, they are prohibited to take some of the products and some of the cargoes to their carriages at some certain checkpoints at the border, and it also doesn't help us to find the best solution for the situation with the exports. Speaking about the automotive transportation, it's just the same situation here. All of those goods that used to be transported by cars from Ukraine to Europe, right now they are now competitive to Ukrainian grain exports, to the imports of Ukraine that used to be carried by the automotive transportations. We have a lot of humanitarian aid that's been provided by cars, and right now we have fuels that are being transported by cars as well. So we have, in this case, we're also getting back to these capacities, to those checkpoints of whether they are able to process this cargo for both sides around the border. And I just wanted to say that the government is well aware about this problem. The government is working to find the ways to resolve those problems. We had the bilateral negotiations with all of our European partners to find the best resolution to that. We've had the taking down of the permissions for the automotive transportations. We've had an agreement with the Polish government that we can provide the cargoes with fuels without additional permissions to Ukraine. And I think that Mustafa and Nayyem is going to give us more details about that. But basically, this has been a decision, and that kind of a decision is only a partial decision. So it's still for the full scale of mostly the grain exports is not going to be delivered by the cars alone. So if we will take a look at this problem in a different point of view, if it's not going to be about the Odessa port, then how are we going to be able to transport our grains? The Baltic Sea ports are called the they have the highest priority to that, and they've also spoken about the Polish ports and Bulgarian ports. But for each of those alternatives and each of those ports, they have their own problems connected to that as well. Because Constanța port in Romania or Varna in Bulgaria, they also have never considered that out of nowhere they're going to have all of the exports from Ukraine coming through them. So basically, they're not ready to work with this kind of the big scale of that. And so that they don't have the needed equipment, they don't have needed personnel to process that. The Klaipeda port, for example, in the Baltic Sea, it is more fitting to work with grains, but you still have to reach Klaipeda before that. So if we will consider the railway connection, that also means for us that you will have to go through whole Poland, that you will have to change the carriages. You will have to change the carriages from the broader to the narrower rail. Then you will go through the Baltic countries, then again switching from narrow to the broad rail, which is a multi-staged and very expensive way of importing your grains. And speaking about the ports in Poland, the problem is just the same. It's just, again, the width of the railway, the width of the rail line, and it's also always about the money and time. So basically, there's no other way to restore exports of grain from Ukraine. There's only way to do that is to restore the exports of grains from Odessa port. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Iryna. I think we will pass the floor to Mustafa Nayyem, if you can hear us. Are you with us? Yes, yes, I'm here. Yes, hello. Yes, hello. So Iryna has already given us a quite pessimistic picture, but even though due to all of the efforts that have been invested already, but we have already seen that there is no opportunity for us to use the full capacities for the agricultural sector and for the metallurgic sector. It seems like out of those numbers that we have seen as of now, it's quite hard for us to utilize it fully. And we see there's differences between the needs, even if we speak about the exports of the grain solely from what we have now and from what is needed, which is needed around 1.5 million tons per month. But Iryna has mostly spoken about what has already been done, but I do believe that you might see something more because, what do you plan to do? What are the capacities and opportunities? Is there something more optimistic that we might have missed? Okay, I will just be speaking of what I can say and not going to be speaking about the plans that are the plans because there are a lot of options of how I would like to resolve the situation. I will just give you the outline of how the situation looks like from my side. Because before the war, we had around like 66% money-wise of this export that has been exported through the ports. 66%, and you can just consider that around the 30% we've had in the railway carrying and the automotive transportation. There was something that has been transported by air, but we usually were using railways and the automotive transportation. Right now, all of the ports are being closed, except for Izmail, Reni, and Ust-Dunaysk. So all of those ports, the three ports out of this, that are working right now. There is a really harsh situation there because you might have seen that the local residents, they're really happy of what is happening from the situation. That might sound a little bit cynical, but that's the truth of it. And there is the opportunity to do something about that. And there's the opportunity for you to get something in and get something out. On the overall scale of what Iryna has already said, so there's more or less the same. We do understand that the railway, even if it's going to be increased, where they can only cover only 2.5 million tons, and that is something that we can transport through the roads if the roads will survive through that time, if we will increase the capacities of our checkpoints, and there's going to be a separate moment that I will mention later. And I'm just right now speaking about the agricultural complexes because we also have the questions about fuels, and the fuel is a tremendous problem for us. But what I just wanted to say in general, I know that there are two exporting options that are being worked out for the exporting the agricultural products. First of all, reopening of the ports. And the second option that I didn't want to mention at this very moment because it's not only being discussed and it's more of the political agreements at this point, but we do understand that Ukraine is not alone on this issue as well. And it's really hard for me to say like who needs it more as of now? Do we need it more? All those countries that will be the victims of the hunger of this season. And we know that the UN is a big actor in this case because they're procuring a lot of our yield and harvests to provide them to the countries that are in need. And with their help and their facilitation of these processes, we are discussing multiple issues of broadening the product delivery points. So even if we will be able to open the big Odessa, the so-called big Odessa, then it's basically going to be up to 10 millions of exports. So there's going to be 5 or 6 we are not going to be able to cope with those capacities that we currently have. So I do hope that on the political level, and I do hope that on the international level, it's going to be also resolved. Speaking on the other issues, that this is a very immediate problem, and this is a catastrophe already. And for a broader perspective, and this situation is going to be preserved, there's definitely going to be the catastrophic outcome. But from what I know, because we participate in all of the agricultural headquarters that works with the government every day on a daily basis, they are getting together to discuss those issues. And at this very moment, the problem is that we don't have a catastrophic issues that it's not being transported. We have the places to preserve this yield. The catastrophe is going to happen if the situation will be preserved in September and October, when we will not have the opportunities to store the new harvest. So under this evaluation for the couple of next months, we will have to provide 4.5 tons. Right now we have the overall capacities of 5 a month. So even in this case, the shortage will not be that high. There will be the shortage because it's about 5 or 10, 6 tons that will not be undersold, but we cannot say that it's going to be tremendously bad. And then again, I'm really hoping that, and I'm trying to be moderate, but I'm really hopeful that we will find the other ways to promote exports. Speaking on metallurgy and some other groups of goods, I kind of have a feeling, and this is what I feel from our team, and this is our feel. The feeling that we've also had collaborated with all together, and we have seen that with their border services capacities, because we're not responsible for them, but we have been collaborating with them and we know their capacities. There is the opportunity to use the extraordinary cases to provide the exports of the products. It might be slightly hurtful for the population because we have to close some of the border checkpoints, and some of our regions might be around the border, might be affected by that. But I know that Ukrzaliznytsia is working on that, on providing more carriages and providing more transportation carriages for be able to use them for additional transportations. But we have been talking about that quite openly, that even if we will imagine that we will do everything right now, everything will be done, and we will be able to take our harvest and our yield not through the ports but through the roads and railroads. Unfortunately, the infrastructure of the European Union where we are transporting is not going to be able to process this flow. We have already seen that, like for example, Constanza, I think, is already filled in with our product. I'm not even talking about the checkpoints on the border. On the agricultural industry, it's a different question straight away, because we have a more complex stories of that on the phytosanitary control that you will have to pass, not only at Ukrainian part, but in the Polish side as well. Whether Gdansk will be able, or Gdynia will be able to take our products, we're not sure about that as well. So we do not know whether there is this direct way for us to transit it. We don't have this opportunity there. And it means that we will need to have some infrastructural decisions to be made of how we can store this harvest in the territory of Poland or in other countries that we will be using for that, when we need to have additional opportunity to then transported. So we have to consider all of the queues at the borders and all of the opportunities of the queues. We have to understand everything that happens on the border. The car will drive there for 6 days. Then there's going to be the line there as well. So to go back and forth, it will be 12 days to take. This is catastrophic. So basically there's just the 2 rides that you can go for the cargo transport. That is going to be terrible. We don't have enough of transportations to do that if it's going to be just twice a month. 5 days, that will be more or less okay. But that will basically mean that for 2 days, you're going to have to drive because there has to be the regime for also for taking some pauses, and then it's going to be restored and refilled, and they're going to go back. So in this situation, it's not about our infrastructure. That's not our infrastructure. If the Polish infrastructure, Romanian infrastructure will not cope with that rhythm. So right now we are in negotiations with Romania, with Poland, on increasing their protocols and on improving their procedures as well. So we've had these negotiations with the Poland, so they're going to increase the workers of the phytosanitary control. It's going to take time for 24/7, but not like it was before when they didn't work on the days off. So they are helping us out a lot with that. They increased the time for work of the phytosanitary control. And we do believe that it's going to be a very breakthrough decision if we will have the opportunity to have the joint control at the border. Right now, we have at the border, we have in the 4 crossings, in the 4 checkpoints, we have this opportunity for the joint control there at the Polish border. And we have all of the decisions there of how and all of the opportunities there to increase it. At this very moment, from what I remember, so we've had it in the Smilnica checkpoint, and this is Smilnica checkpoint, Hrushev checkpoint, Uryniev and Ustluch. So those are the 3 main checkpoints where we have a joint control with Poland, and it basically gives us the clear understanding that the speed of the control pass being decreased. And due to the fact that we have this European integration vector right now, we have the support from the European side, we have this opportunity to sign an additional agreement for the European Commission too. That's not the STFI, it's basically a separate agreement that can be signed separately with a country of the European Union because they have the Schengen zone and the different regulations, but we will have the opportunity to have a joint control on the border. That means that it will decrease the speed of the procedure, it decreased the number of the workers that are needed to be there. We'll be able to help our colleagues, the colleagues will help us. It will decrease the money spent for the infrastructure, and that will definitely make the border more transparent, and the corruptional risks are going to be decreased because we have a joint control on that. This kind of a decision might be taken in a quite fast pace. Actually, it's just over there right now. I'll be even say even more that we're initiating it into different directions. We discussed it with Poland, discussed it with Romania. We know that the Polish colleagues from the Ministry of Infrastructure have contacted the government and have already discussed it with the Ministry of Finance of Poland. We are working on that as well, and we know where we should go on with that. And we do believe that it would have been very good if that would be discussed at the highest level, maybe on the level of the 2 presidents and the president of the European Commission. Maybe that would be good if we would have this thing made. And that will definitely help us a lot. Another question that I would still consider on the agenda, the question that is still very relevant, we are, of course, and I do believe that we haven't said about that before, and we just wanted to say about that today. We are taking down all of the limitations on the Polish permission. You might have remembered that there has been 5 permissions for a quota. We have decided that we will take down these limitations because this limitation is definitely preventing our exports right now. It's not that time for us to think about that. Well, basically, I do believe that we've managed to do that for the last 5 years. We were able to cut down all of the speculations with permissions. You cannot buy it right now. That cannot be just the speculations of that due to what has been done in the last half a year, where the using of the barcodes and the limitations and the control at the checkpoints and the Schlag system that gives you the opportunity to book it in transparent way. So right now it's not about permissions, but due to the war, you know that most of the countries have taken down those limitations. So we have broken down this as well. The only country that we haven't canceled the permission system is Poland. It's not because they do not want, but because the questions of the transporters and carriers is 15% of their GDP. This is the biggest share in the European Union. So they are really relying on their carriers. So if they will take down the limitations for us, that it will be really hard for us, even though they're just 2 months ago, they have launched their mobility package from the European Union that has increased the overall payment and salaries for their drivers. So that is why our drivers, if there wasn't war for us, they are more competitive. They're Polish, and they might have taken the market. So that was a political issue for Poland, but still, we have taken down these limitations from our side. I do hope that we will continue to follow those conditions for us to have 20,000 more additional permissions from the Polish side. And this is about both the passenger and the cargo flow in Krakiewicz. I do hope that the next months to come, we will give you the good news and we will try to provide the differences for these two flows, and this will help us to decrease the tension for these two routes. And Krakiewicz is going to be freer, and it's going to be used more properly. And it's also going to be the decrease at Mezhkovici water checkpoint, and they will have 20,000 additional permissions and another 20,000 if we will follow the conditions of the Polish loan. For Krakiewicz, Шегині, and Rava-Ruska, and they will be able to consider that as well. But even under those conditions that we currently have, the permissions from Poland will be seized, considering with everything that we have about the permissions right now. Then we will be out of the Polish permissions only in October. We will run out of the permissions in Poland. That might be a catastrophe. Everybody knows what has been happening with that. What are we hoping for? We're hoping for that we will be able to complete our agreement procedures on the transportations agreement with the European Union. That will be the European visa-free regime for our transport. That will help us to go to transit through all of the countries that we have the joint border with no permissions. That's quite real for all of us. I have really, really good faith on that. And it's basically, so we have been working on that since September last year. The war has started, but we have now a better procedure there. We're ready with all of the documents. We're ready to proceed with that. That's about this issue. What about another story that we have? The story about the licenses that we have, the licenses and permissions that we have been providing to the markets. What the problem is, I think that the most of the carriers that work in the markets, they have worked in the internal logistics. So we have been transporting fuels or have not been transporting the aviation details with the cars because it never was needed. So right now, what we have seen already the increase of the licensees. Well, we have just simplified our procedures for up to 3 days, and we have already seen that this now coming back to reality, because the overall amount of the licenses for all of the transportation is for both the cargo and the passenger logistics is now increased by 1,400 licenses. That is a lot of licenses, and they just have been provided in 2 months. That's around 40 licenses a day that have been provided. And all of those carriers, even if we have that's just five cars each, that's going to be a very big pressure. And right now, they don't have the experience of working in the European Union. They don't have the opportunity to do that in the right way because there are the specific rules for that. They also have their own reasons of how they can use their cars to drive in that. And Iryna was right because the railway is saving us and railway has been working in the best way that really saved us. So I do hope that the situation is going to get better. So once again, if just speaking overall, I can't say that I'm optimistic or that I can't say I'm pessimistic. So basically, if we will compare the situation with what we had 2 months ago, when we had seen of what we've had before and what has been provided to us, we have been shocked on what is the amount of people that just want to leave. Because, you know, in all of this flow, I'll not even mention the humanitarian help because the humanitarian aid, because it's completely different issues. There has been a lot of transportations. They take a lot of time. And again, there needs to provide the humanitarian aid through those railway stations as well. But I have seen how the state responded to that, how the system responded to that. I know that there's problems. I'm not going to say there are no problems with that, but overall, I can say that we're really close to the market now. We have never been closer. And it's about the fuel producers and about the agricultural producers. We have this really strong contact starting from the prime minister level and ending up with the head of the departments. We have been working really closely with all of those people. We have already forgotten about the subordination, who is the head of it, who has to be reporting to someone. I know that we're talking directly to the people who are the head of the big companies that are helping everybody out. That is a very close contact for all of the people. And I know that I do hope that we will preserve this kind of tender contact during the peace times as well. So I do understand that there's a big desire to help, really. So there's not this kind of a bureaucratical idiocracy right now that's let us do something just because we have to do something. We understand that all of the carriers are now in the bad position and all of the producers right now are in the bad position, but we know that we'll be able to help. So the market is pressuring on it from one hand, yes, but the state machine is responding to that quite effectively, and I would say even very creatively in this case. So starting from the fuel crisis, I don't know if you know or not, but you know, it's not just about the resources, it's about the logistics that is the most important. So we were able to take down the questions on the queues. We've had it already in place. So in the same time, when we have been providing the special things, but the special stickers for our transportation for our cars, for them just to be able to moving to Poland. And you know, the Polish people, they were really shocked about that. They've said, tell us that there is basically, when you know that there is that sometimes you can even violate the law to make it even faster, to work it even better and faster. So basically, they're cutting down their procedures right now. They're cutting down their procedures. They're cutting down their regulations right now as well. So I am sure that they will be able to provide the most effectively working system as fast as possible. If we will already be speaking about, for example, the ports will not open, restore, there will be no decisions in place. Whether we'll be able to provide the exporting capacity that is needed, I hope yes. Maybe I'm just overreacting about the capacities that we have, but I'm also hoping that our partners on the other side of the borders are just as interested in that as we are. And basically, I do understand that one of the things that I really would like to ask all of us to do is to communicate all together, because if we have the grain here, it doesn't mean that there is already there. It means that we only have it here. And if you have already painted some kind of a balance over all the planet, if we have already said that 75 or 80% of our harvest is going to be once again replanted, it doesn't mean that we already have it. We have already spoken about that, that in order for you to have it, we need to have your help in delivering it so that we will be able to provide it further on. And I have already seen that there's even the Polish legislators, the Romanian legislators, and all of the European colleagues that are also being slightly um, tensed because they've offered a new action plan that is, I cannot recall how it's being called, it's just have been introduced recently. It's about having the solidarity with Ukrainian logistics, and we've had this big meeting yesterday and it was quite clear they're shocked because it just has happened right now. The understanding from what has happened has come right now. It's not just about the closed ports. Closed ports are not just about the closed ports. They know that are out of food right now. So basically, they understand that they really now would like to start to find the regulations. So what I would like to offer in this case is to communicate as much as possible, because we are all knowing about that, but we have to communicate it even more. We have to explain of what it is that we actually need. We do understand that from our side, we have a very specific list of what is that is needed, and we have a standard list of what is needed. We have to repeat it, and repeat it. We need ports, we need the infrastructure in the European Union countries for just to have the customs control. We need to improve the capacities and investment on infrastructure. We need more and more carriages on to carry grain and fuels and railway. And we need to have the lesser fees and access taxes for those products. And we need to simplify the border crossing procedures. If all of that will be done, we will be using it. It will be going and delivering everything that is needed. Okay, thank you, Mustafa. You know, basically, we will have to, you have said it all of that in so good details. We will just have to now do that at a separate publications, but just a very two brief questions, and we will switch to the railway. Then we'll have a question from our American colleagues. So is all of the Black Sea closed by the Russians? Is there any opportunity to use the sea? For example, if we will be moving closer to Romanian border. Okay, not for just for for all of us not to have the illusion. What is the problem with the ports? It's not that just about that there is a physical presence of Russian ships in the ports, and it's not about the sea being mined. But speaking about the situation that we currently have, Ukraine is not able to use not of the single ports that we have on the Black Sea. All of the ports are closed. The reach of the Black Sea is not available for us even throughout our ports at the Danube River. So only Romania can reach the Black Sea through Romanian ports, through Constanța. That's the only way how we can use the Black Sea, but that's basically only can be used for recharging. But speaking about the situation, if we will imagine that the ports are going to open, so the first is demining. Demining will take some time. Like, I'm sorry, just give me 2 minutes. So this is about the question of the demining. We would not be able to demine it in time. We need some time, but like now the people have said that we can do that in time. There is some technology of demining that we will use. And now the question, those ships that they would like to get to our ports, whether they will have an needed insurance coverage by their insurance, and how it's going to influence the prices of that. And all of those ports, they're also, will there be, all of those ships are in leasing. So basically, whether the leasing owners are going to be providing the permissions to go to the ports, what is going to be the insurance rate for those ships? What is going to be the insurance rent for the containers? That's a different story. It's not a very simple story, even if we will reopen the ports. But from what we have seen now, we are ready. We are ready to demine, because that's something that we definitely need to do. It's needed like the air. But the problem is that the other side would also work with us on that. Like we have had it when these skies have been closed, and some of the airlines have already closed their their operations in Ukraine, but that we had still some people who continue their operations. So I think we will have to communicate that further to work with the main insurance companies. And I know that the government is ready to provide some additional money for covering this insurance expenses in case if they should be valid, and again providing the specific accounts for that, but we need some help on that as well. Okay, then there's the final question for you, and we will get to the Ukrzaliznytsia then. So do you see the opportunities for exporting the sunflower oils under these conditions? The exporting the sunflower oil in the duplicate? Now, according to the current situation where we have the blockage of the ports, well, now there's not a problem for that because I think that we are exporting the sunflower oil right now. I can take a look at what have been for April, like 2 weeks ago. What was the final date on that? What was the exports of the oil? Sunflower, 151,000 tons. That is something that has been exported out of this time. That's not that, okay, that's less than we used to have before, but that's not that much. There's not a lot of losses that we've had, but then again, that's just about those things that we can provide and year after year. So that's more or less okay. But let us then again speak about the things that we currently have. Do we have a problems that there is the problems on the border? Like we have a lot of products there and they cannot move. Just that as we had it with the fuels, like we don't have the opportunity to import it. So there are some resources that we cannot import it. No, it turns out there's no this kind of things. It turns out that with those ways that we can use, we don't have the line waiting for that. But speaking about the railways and roads, that we can use that for the transportation. It's not going to be a problem for that. So I think there's not a lot of questions in logistics yet, but we know that they're going to have some questions because right now everything is peaking. Okay, Mustafa, thank you very much. So we're moving and switching to the railway operations. So Valerii, please. Yes, I know that. As Mustafa has said, I think that we might take 15 minutes more and discuss the 15 minutes now about the railways. But I just wanted to ask you, Valerii, what is your vision about the Ukrzaliznytsia? What else Ukrzaliznytsia can do in order to broaden Ukrainian export capacities to add up to what Mustafa has said in maybe just a couple of minutes? Maybe you will have this opportunity to take a look what were the questions on the railways. Maybe you can cover them straight away. If no, then I'm going to read out some of the questions in the end. So please, Valerii. Good day, dear colleagues. Good day, dear colleagues. What I wanted to start with was just saying that the railway transportation takes an important place in Ukrainian transport systems. Around 65% of all of the cargoes have been transported by the railways. Before the war has started, throughout the year, we have carried 314 billion tons of carriages. 112 millions were exported goods. Out of this 112 millions of the exported goods, there were around 300 were delivered to the seaports. In a month, in average, we have transported 29 million tons of cargoes, and we have delivered to Ukrainian ports from 7 to 10 million tons. And of course, since the war has started, we have had the blockade of all of the ports that has started, and except for those 4 ports that have been mentioned in Danube, the Kilia, Ismail, Raini, and Ustanai. So we only have those 4 ports working, but they have very low capacity, and in overall scale, they only take 1/10 of all of those porting capacities that we used to have before the war. Then, what has now started with the railway transportation? Since the very beginning of aggression, the whole business has stopped, the whole load has stopped, and in average average capacities has decreased from up to 120,000 tons per day. So we had a decrease of our capacities by 5 times. So that was a shocking situation for our state, because around 80% of our enterprises have stopped their activities. So that was the logistics and transportation has not been made. But what has happened now? Step after step, the economy and the businesses are adapting to the changes that have changed. So to the changes that have happened. So if before through the ports we have exported a lot, so we've had a lot of transportation provided, we had a lot of goods provided by the sea, by the roads. So right now, with the closing of the ports, the main flow of the transport is now being done through the western border, and through the western borders of Ukraine. And basically, on one hand, our countries has the Black Sea and the Azov Sea. Then we've had the Russian Federation at the border and Belarus on the border, which is the helper of our aggressor. And so basically we have the only way to be exporting our goods is on the west. So basically we only have 13 railroads crossing, and we have 4 railroad crossings with Poland, we have 2 with Hungary, and we have with the Moldovan Republic, and we have it with Romania. So the overall provision of the cargoes potentially goes to the 3,422 carriages. So this is basically what we can carry a day. So it's around 220,000 tons a day, or 6.6 million a month. So this is something that we can provide, and this is something that we can provide with railway. But as of now, we can only deliver 2,000 carriages, around 130,000 cargoes a day. So basically, there's 3.8 million tons of cargo a month. Of course, those numbers are incomparable to what we've had before and to what used to be the scale of the ports and what used to be the scales from the ports. So that is now a big problem, because we know that it does not cover all of the needs of our economy at this point of time. And we now having the capacity is 220,000 a day. We can only do that with 130,000 tons of cargoes every day. So the biggest problem is, what is the root of the problem? Is that the railway infrastructure of Europe and Ukraine is significantly different. We have the widths of the railways with 1,511 millimeters, and the European width is 1,431. So they have a different locomotives, they have different carriages with all of the connections mechanisms. So we have two different systems and two different infrastructures with that. And in order for us to get the connections between the two of those infrastructure, there are just 2 ways of how we can do that and how we can provide those cargoes. That is basically to we transfer it from Ukrainian railway to the European carriages. And basically, in order to do that, at the borders of our countries with the Western countries, we have some parts where the European railway 1435 is getting to our territories, and there is a part of the railway connection when we are with our carriages, when we are getting to the territory of the neighboring countries. So basically at those lines, when we have 2 of the railways, the broad and the narrow one, we have the terminals there that have a specific change for the European line. So this is basically the first problem that happens there of why we cannot use the full potential of that in our carriage is that we do not have enough checkpoints for the reloading of the cargoes, but we are working on that. And we're working on that with our Western partners. We're trying to grow the number of the terminal and reloading terminals there. And we're trying to we're having more and more mobile checkpoints to reload the cargoes. Moreover, the most important and acute problem is the need for the wagons, for the carriages, because we can carry much more products and much more products to the border, but we either have the problems with the reloading car carriages, or there is the problem with the need for the European carriages for us to complete the reloads. So basically, when we have the two different systems, and I just wanted to say that we have two main things, it's either doing the reload from one carriages to another, or the second case is to change the carriages of the Ukrainian wagons, so we're changing the wheel pairs, and then the Ukrainian carriage can go through the European Union network and grid. But this is the second option, and the second function is very limited due to the reasons that Ukrainian carriages had more, has it it's bigger. So even if you change in the wheels itself, then each of the routes and each of the transportation should be approved by the European carriers, so that our bigger carriage could be fitted into their infrastructure, because they have different sizes. They have different sizes for the bridges, different sizes for the building's closeness. So out of those two ways of either reloading the carriages or changing the wheel frame, the most potentially possible is to provide the reload from one part to another. So if we will then sum up of what are the problems right now for the main reloading opportunities, so I would just add it up to the three main points. The first is just tech-wise. So we have not enough the reloading terminals, but we don't have enough carriages, the European carriages with 1435 railway line, because Europe was not ready to this new capacities of the goods that is going to come. And the third technical problem is that even that the infrastructure, the European infrastructure, the infrastructure of the European Union countries has limited capacities, logistics capacities, because it was built and was only providing the needs for the European transportation, because basically the overall share of the transportation is 35%. So we've had the 65% of the railway carriers. So European infrastructure from the very beginning, it was not supposed to be carrying that many carriages by railway. So there is a lot of technical problems to that. The technical infrastructure, European infrastructure, is not ready tech-wise to transport this big scale. They need some additional carriers, additional locomotives. They need to build up some additional grid as well. Another problem, the one that is preventing us for setting out the railway connection properly, is the organizational issues. The organization issues that are first of all concerning Ukrainian businesses, because the businesses that for many years have been working on the ports, they have had their logistic chains built, but right now they should get reoriented, and now they are switching to those Western checkpoints. In the same time, the business of the 13 checkpoints is not divided equally. So, for example, we've had the maximum capacity field for Isa, for Uzhhorod, for all of the others. We have lines there for multiple months, but we have 8 border passages that are not used that much, because historically we never had cargoes passing there. So we need some time to organize it in the right way, the reloading, the additional coordination, then build up the chain and network on the territory of those countries that are located, that are the Ukrainian neighbors. So basically, these organizational issues, it presupposes that our businesses should get to that as fast as possible and to use all of the needed passages that have been historically working on that. So we need some additional time to have the quotas in the port so we can reload our cargoes in the European ports as soon as possible. We need to have the contracts with the European carriers, the railway carriers that will help us to provide the connections with the neighboring countries. And then when we will all end up with these organizational issues, we'll get to the new questions, which is the bureaucracy questions and the bureaucracy procedures that we have on the border, because we have this border services, we have the customs, we have the phytosanitarian services, and we have the veterinary services. And what Mustafa Nayyem has said, that now we are simplifying these procedures because we have this double control. Before that, we have these 4 services from Ukraine that have all of the regulation and work. Then we're moving outside the border when we have another officers providing the same work. So right now we have this coordinational council that has been created by the cabinet of ministries, and we're making this decision so that with the joint roads we would have the joint control, for example, for this transit carriages, so just going to in transit from Poland to Romania or Moldova, just for us to take down the phytosanitarian control or the veterinary control, because I know that Poland has already considered this option, that the transit carriages that are not going to be delivered to Poland then will not be controlled. They will be only controlled in the final destination. Those are the 3 blocks that are currently preventing us from increasing the transportation capacities on the railway. And I just wanted to tell it to you that Ukrzaliznytsia has enough carriages, enough locomotives, enough network, enough grids, because we've had a lot of the carriage stations before the war were ready to take a lot of carriages, a lot of cargo to the border. And then we will have some of the limitations that are mostly connected to the European side and their lack of carriages, their lack of the transporting capacities, the unreadiness of the infrastructure of Europe to swallow and to process Ukrainian products. But we are constantly working on that. We have every week consultations with all of the carriers, with the neighboring countries that we have. Moreover, we're engaging business to those meetings as well. And we're trying to try how we can improve the capacities and how we can improve the flow and volume. So we see that the result of this work, there are in place. We know that since the aggression has started, out of 10 millions of the exporting capacities, we've got down to 10 millions. That's about all of the cargoes. And now we are getting back to growth. So now we are to the level of 3.9 to 4 million a month. So we are now increasing the exports of all the products. And speaking about the agricultural exports on grain, so we have started it in March. We have started it on a daily basis at all of the connections. We've had 120 carriages, but then we had 220 by the end of March. By the end of April, we had 414 carriages. Right now, we're already providing 350, 370 carriages a day. It means that basically our goal is to get to 500, 600 carriages a day. So right now, if we speak about the exports of the agricultural products, then in March this year, we have been exporting 416,000 tons in our railway connection. In April, we've had 638,000 tons, and we are growing. We really would like to get from 1 million to 1.5 million thousand tons a month of the exporting of the grain products. But we do understand that it's not enough, because we know that in the pre-war times, as just a person who used to work with grains, I will just give you the overall balance of how the grain is exported. Because the record harvest of year 2021, we have had 106 tons of the oil and the legumes culture, and we plan to provide 65, 70 million tons for exporting, and the 40 millions would have been transferred through the railway to the ports. But as of now, and basically we have been exporting through the railway ports from 5 to 7 million tons of grains. But right now, I just wanted to say that again, right now we can provide 640,000 tons a month. If we will add up to that 400, 600,000 tons of export that is expected from those 4 ports that we currently have at the Danube River, if we will add up to that for the 600, 800 tons that we will be exporting in time, that we will be exporting through the automotive transportation as well, then we will get to 3 million tons a month for the grains, which will be 46 millions that we will be exporting through all of the different means of transportation. That is twice lower than we've had before the war, when we have planned for the 65 or 70 million tons. So right now, in this case, we can export only 36 million tons of different types of transportation. But if we will consider the internal positions or the availability of the ports, then I just wanted to say that before the war, we've had 57 million tons and we have lost 13 millions of storages or tons of storages we have already lost. So 43 millions of tons in the storage capacities that we have. Understanding that we have 30 million tons of the leftovers, then I would like to once again say that Mustafa was right, that we will face some problems in August and September, that it will be not, we won't have the place for us to store the grains after that, because we understand that we will have the old harvest there and we will have no place for the new harvest at all. And we will have to increase, we basically have to increase the opportunities for transporting all of the goods from the border. But I would like to say that we are still exporting a month 3.8 million tons, and out of that we will have only 640,000 tons of grain. So basically we would like to get 1.6 million tons of grain on that. So that would be briefly about the overall situation with railways. And I also wanted to say that we're always trying to stimulate all of our neighboring transportation means. We're also always asking them to help us to make it better, and we are trying to also upload and download them a lot of this quantity. And we're trying, even though we are already providing them more than our partners are supporting. We had more than 400 carriages that already been kept at the border, and we're trying to pressure on our European partners in a way. We're trying to ask them to take more of our cargo. And we are ready to work more in order to do that. We have all of the resources available. So we need to have some time so that our European partners and railway would find additional resources, would find the bureaucratical issues resolutions on the control, so that our businesses would create the new logistics chains, and they will use all of our transportation capacities, and then we will grow in the exports on the railway. Well, if that's all from my side very briefly, but if you'll have some questions, please. Yes, I would have the 3 questions that we've had out of those questions that have been outlined, and let's try to cover them in 10 minutes just for us to end in 12:30. 7. But basically, there was the questions of more the political issues, but maybe you can cover that as well. Have you considered the opportunity of providing that grains through the territory of Belarus to the Lithuanian ports, or this is basically the politically closed issue? I can only speak as Ukrzaliznytsia employee of how do we see this situation. At this very moment, we consider Belarus and Republic of Belarus as an ally to the Russian Federation, which is an aggressor. And we know for sure that from the territory of the Belarus, as we have had the we have the occupiers coming from the territory of the Belarus, and basically we know that right now they have been using their own army and they have been using their transportations to provide the weapons to the Russian Federation as well. This is the main means how they provide it to their army. So basically, we have made everything that was possible just to re-establish all of the connections with Russian Federation and Belarus, just for us to prevent the entering of the occupiers and prevent additional supply to the occupiers. So basically, we don't have the technical capacities to do that and to do the connection with Belarus, and we will prevent that from happening as much as possible, because if we open this connection, then it will mean that we are inviting the occupiers to our territory.
И агрессии против Украины было принято решение конфисковать.
Another question, that since the beginning of war and the aggression against Ukraine, we have confiscated all of the properties on the railways that has belonged to Russian Federation or to Belarus. So right now we have 17.7 thousand carriages that have been temporarily arrested due to that. And right now we are resolving the legal issues on that of how should we confiscate it properly? We are having some legislative questions about that. So basically, even on that, we've already have the 17,000 carriages that have been confiscated, and the cargo that has been in that is going to be used to compensate all of those losses that have been provided to our infrastructure by the aggressor countries. We have around 6,000 kilometers of the railway that have been damaged. We have a lot of bridges that have been damaged, and we have a lot of stations that have been destroyed, and more than 100 of our employees that have been killed. So in my point of view, to discuss the opportunities of the transport through the territory of Belarus is not on the table right now. But this is about the higher position from Ukrainian government. But as the workers of Ukrzaliznytsia, we do not see that possible. Okay, another question from another neighbor that you haven't mentioned is about Moldova. We had a couple of questions about increasing the capacities through the territory of Moldova. Why haven't you mentioned that? Or is it technically or commercially impossible, or maybe you're using that connection already? We have been using all of the connection that we have, and with Moldova as well. In Mohilov, Podilsk, and in Sokyryany, there are tow stations from our side that we are using in order to provide some transportation through Moldova. Moreover, our seaport, our Reni port, is fully being serviced through Moldova Republic. So basically, we are actively working with Moldova. It's just that, at 2 o'clock today, we had a working meetings that has been held by our colleagues from Moldova Railway. And we're continuing working on that. We're continuing on improving their capacities and transportation through Moldova. But what the problem is in this case, the problem is that the Moldovan Moldova's railways have not been ready for this increase of capacities, transit capacities and transit transportation through their territory. Because, for example, their weight limitation says 28 carriages, that what they can take as a part of the one train. For example, in Ukrzaliznytsia, we have 57 carriages, so we will have to break our train in two so that we would be able to transport it through Moldova, because they have some limitations in the weight, they have some limitations in the possible passing, so they have the lack of personnel there. So these are the questions that we are trying to resolve in the working regime, and we're trying to find additional opportunities to transit it through Moldova. For example, in Belchinets,
подписано приграничное соглашение на ежесуточную
in
передачу.
Belchinets, we have had an agreement on a daily transportations, 140 carriages a day. We now have 117, so we have some capacities to grow, and we will grow that as well. And we have the Sakorane Oknitsa connection when we can also use 86 trains. Right now we only have 20 there, so we will be trying to improve the Sokedane-Oknitsa connection, and we will grow the number of carriages transported through there. So we're working on that. We are only supporting this idea of this collaboration, and Ukrzaliznytsia is ready to provide additional capacities to those connections. The problem is that Moldova is not ready to that, and Europe is not ready to provide the same scope there. Okay, thank you very much. And the final question, whether the bombing of the infrastructure is making significant impact on their opportunities to provide the exports. Like, of course, this is something that creates additional problems. As I've already said, out of the 23,000 of our main capacities of carriages, we have lost 8,000, or they have been affected due to the bombarding or other things. But Ukrzaliznytsia, before the war has started, has a very developed railway, grid, and we're trying to find some new routes. Moreover, we have also the restoring trains that can also restore the capacities, restore the capacities of the grid. So they are rebuilding the railroad and the railways. They're rebuilding those bridges that the occupiers and the aggressor have destroyed. For example, the Belgorod-Dnestrovsky bridge that has provided the connections between Odessa and Ismail. There has been the fifth tryout to destroy this bridge. The occupiers are always trying to harm our infrastructure, but we are trying to work with that. We have a lot of personnel for that, and we have the needed capacities and materials to do that. So, of course, we understand that influences our work negatively, but we're working with that. We understand that this is the war, and we need to provide the transportations of the goods for our military men and for the economy of the country. Valerii, thank you very much for getting that detailed in your descriptions and answering the questions. I'm really grateful to you, to Mustafa, to Iryna, that has been with us today. I'm really grateful to everyone who has been here with us today. I think it was a very informative meeting for all of us. I would like to wish all of you a good evening, a good night, a silent night for all of us today. And I wish all of us the faster victory from Ukrainian side on this war. Thank you very much for being a part of our event today. And we will continue inviting you for the very next meetings, interesting meetings we're about to have. Thank you very much. Hope to see you soon. All the best. Goodbye.